proposed securitization of the 22.7 trillion naira Ways and Means loan, when approved by the National Assembly, would be the largest source of the projected 77 trillion naira debt stock at the end of Buhari's administration. The World Bank had in November last year warned the Nigerian government against financing deficits by borrowing from the CBN to the Ways and Means advances, saying this put fiscal pressures on the country's expenditures. Despite warnings from experts and organizations, the federal government has kept borrowing from the CBN to fund budget deficits. The World Bank projected in December 2022 that interest payment on the federal government's borrowing from the Central Bank of Nigeria will gulp about 62% of government revenue by 2027, despite the restructuring plan. Joining us on the show this morning as we discuss Nigeria's debt profile is Tilewa Adebajo, investment banker and economist, chief executive officer of the CFG Advisory. Welcome to the morning show.
Good morning and a happy new year.
Happy new year to you too.
Well, with Nigeria's debt profile, 77 trillion, we're told, and then 22 trillion Ways and Means, and more borrowing to come. Government says, so subsidy will have to go by May 29, but after May 29, there may be another government in place that will say this subsidy we should still wait for our own 18 months to allow us to settle down. So what really is in your view, the economic outlook for Nigeria this year? Because it appears that truly revenue is our problem. We don't even know where that revenue will come from, and we have heavy debt burden.
Well, my view is that in any system that you designed, we have what you call a financial circuit breaker. We all know what circuit breakers are. And circuit breakers are preventive measures that you put in place to ensure stability. We use that word normally when there's a power surge. If it comes too much, it shuts down the system to prevent any damage. Same thing in the financial system. And we have circuit breakers that we've put into our financial system. We've created the Debt Management Office in 2000 to manage our debt profile more efficiently. We've put in place a Fiscal Responsibility Act, and we also have put in place in the Central Bank Act in Section 38 clear guidelines that limits advances to governments.
Ways and Means.
Yes, Ways and Means. And unfortunately, for some reason, we've ignored all these circuit breakers. We've exceeded all those limits, and we're not addressing these issues properly. The debt profile now, according to the Debt Management Office, as of when Buhari started, was only 50 billion. Over the last, say, 7 years, just on under 7 years, this administration has piled up another $100 billion of debt. So right now, the debt profile now stands at about $150 billion. $100 billion in public debt, and you have the $50 billion, which is the Ways and Means that has not been accounted for. Then when you take a look at the intervention funds, that's another $50 billion. So currently now, the total debt profile for the country is about $200 billion. So, but because of the laws, you can see that over the years, the government has started to use Ways and Means. So the Ways and Means is now 22 trillion, which is an illegal finance. Because if you take a look at the revenue profile of the government, the Ways and Means financing right now should not be more than between 500 billion to 1 trillion at the max. Now it's at 22 trillion. So you're going to have to ask the central bank governor how he broke the Central Bank Act and put Ways and Means at 22 trillion. The Debt Management Office is the only authority that has powers vested in it to raise debt for the federal government of Nigeria. External debt borrowing is the only thing they go to the National Assembly for to seek permission. Internal borrowing, like Ways and Means, the president cannot approve it. The laws already give the powers to the Debt Management Office to issue those securities based upon its own understanding. The limitations of the Ways and Means are there. So you cannot go to 22 million through Ways and Means debt, then you want to take it off the central bank balance sheet, throw it off to the DMO and tell the DMO to go and securitize it. It doesn't work that way. So that is where we have the conflict in terms of how we are managing our debt and how we are communicating our debt. So you said earlier that they want to send the securitization proposal to the Ways and Means Committee to the National Assembly. Under which law? There's no law in Nigeria today that says that you take Ways and Means financing to the National Assembly for approval. All the domestic debt has been issued. This Debt Management Office does not need approval from anybody but the supervising board, which consists of the Vice President, who is the chairman of that board, the Central Bank Governor is on the board, the Minister of Finance is on the board, the Chief Economic Advisor to the President is on the board, and the Accountant General is also on the board. Those are the people that take charge of domestic debt decisions. Okay, not the National Assembly.
Okay, sorry to interrupt you. I get what you have said. But when we had the breakdown of the 2023 budget, it was Patience Unia, the head of the Debt Management Office, appealing to the National Assembly to approve the Ways and Means, because she said if that is not done, you have 18.5% interest rate, but that if it is securitized over the 40-year period, that the interest rate accruing would come down to 8.5%. Is it possible that the head of the DMO, Debt Management Office, is not aware of the law?
Well, she made a statement last year, January, that sent panic into the market when she came to say that the Ways and Means financing was going to be securitized. She started this. And when I said, what concerns the DMO with CBN financing? Let's understand there are two separate institutions. On the board of the DMO, the supervisory board of the DMO, the Central Bank Governor sits on that board with the Vice President and the Minister of Finance to make decisions on that. On top of that, they also have another working committee, which the Debt Management Office chairs, which is a monetary that does the harmonization of monetary and fiscal policy, that consists of officials of the Central Bank, Ministry of Finance, and the DMO. They're supposed to meet 4 to 5 times a year to do the harmonization of a lot of all these things and make recommendations to their various boards. So Ways and Means is a Central Bank of Nigeria situation financing, not Debt Management Office. And there's no law that says that the central bank will transfer its debt to the Debt Management Office. So if there's any requirement to the National Assembly on domestic debt, like I've told you, the DMO is already empowered to go and raise money for domestic debt. The only time that you go to the National Assembly is if you want to borrow abroad. The Euro bonds and international financing goes to the National Assembly, not domestic borrowing.
All right, so thank you for setting out that framework that the access or Ways and Means in itself is illegal because we've gone over the threshold. However,
Ways and Means is not illegal.
Sorry, I mean
what we have done is the fact
securitization.
that the securitization of Ways and Means financing is illegal.
Yes.
And what has happened is that the Ways and Means financing is supposed to be right now at only 1 trillion.
And
it is at 22 trillion. So they've exceeded the limits. So that is where the illegality is.
All right, so thank you. Now, the Minister of Finance has come out to say that that is the best way forward for Nigeria in terms of managing its debts. And the reason I was saying that is because you put that side by saying that it is illegal in terms of securitizing the Ways and Means. What is the option for Nigeria at this point? So debt in itself, as we've often said on the show, is not the challenge. Debt service to revenue ratio, which is almost at 100%, is the challenge. 8.6% is the challenge. What's the way forward? Because we've had this conversation, we've had this discussion for a while now. The federal government is bent on securitizing the Ways and Means. Analysts are saying it is illegal. What's the way forward for Nigeria?
Well, the Senate couldn't approve it because I have also written to the Senate and sent them the information. And they had that heated debate in the House. The Senate President decided not to hold a public hearing on this and shut everybody out and took the session private.
But they're reopening it now.
Well, they'll reopen it and then we'll see what happens and see if the senators will pass an illegality. And don't forget that the Debt Management Office can also be sued in his own capacity. So they can be taken to court for breaking the law. That's clear. The way forward is very simple. When you have a doctrine of necessity, you're supposed to not borrow more than 1 trillion, and you've gotten to 22 trillion. That is excessive. So that means that you should have approached the National Assembly a long time ago, sent an emergency economic rescue bill by which you seek to amend both the Fiscal Responsibility Act and the CBN Act to allow you to do all these things. You do not go into an act of illegality and then come to try to rectify it. So what have we done with $200 billion? Where is the impact? Most of it has gone towards funding recurrent expenditure, yet you want to borrow more. We all have households. I cannot sit down here and begin to take on more debt than I can pay back. No bank is going to give you more money than your salary. But because you are a sovereign, you have that challenge. Look at what is happening now. Public borrowing is increasing by 75%, while credit to the private sector is 25%. Government is crowding out private sector funding. If we put your deposit in the bank, for every 100,000 naira you deposit in the bank, they will take 35,000 for CRR. So the banks do not have all their capital to deploy. So what we're saying is that the solution now is, first of all, let's restrict our step. Who made the mistake? Why did the central bank allow 22 trillion of ways and means financing without backing of the law? So first of all, heads must roll. Some people will fall on their swords. When you fall on your swords, then you now know that some people are taking responsibility for this massive mistake. You cannot continue. We cannot continue. If not, that means we don't respect our laws. So this is impunity. So you have a system in place, and then you are now arguing that you want to securitize something. Go and read this. The CBN section 38 is only 4 lines. Very simple on ways and means advancing. And there are reasons why these laws were put into place. It is what we call financial circuit breakers. When you ignore your financial circuit breakers, you throw the whole economy into turmoil. So the solution is very simple. People who made these mistakes have to pay for their prices. Then the government will now go. Where is the Attorney General in all this? He's the one that's supposed to, who is advising the president. The president cannot approve securitization against the CBN. So they need to amend the laws. So the president has to, first of all, come clean with how much we really owe. That's number one. Is it more than 200 billion?
So you're thinking it's more than this 77 trillion?
It's more than 77, is more than, because you need to look at that. There's 200 billion that I can account for, US dollars.
Wow.
So we need to come out clean, first of all, to say this is how much, this is where the problem is. When you come out and say the problem is, then the people that cause the problem, they need to fall on their swords. Okay. Then you approach the National Assembly and say, we want to make amendments to certain laws that will allow us to be able to do this. Then you send it to them, you make your case, they make the amendments of the laws, and then we now know that we have new laws that gives government more latitude.
And we have to do all of this when elections are already around the corner in February. So obviously, if you are going the way of this illegality, that means this budget will just pass an illegality, because when you look at the fact that there's no finance bill signed into law before the budget was passed, there's a level of illegality. Another illegality is that we cross the threshold on deficits. Anyway, you said there's a leverage there if there's an insecurity emerging, but the president has not proved that. That's another illegality. And also, where is this 1.8 trillion that in interest that now they are talking about that if we don't see, because that's the blackmail. I don't want to use the word blackmail, but some people, some analysts have said, oh, that's the blackmail for impunity here, that the interest is already mounting up to 1.8 trillion.
Okay, you know what the problem is now? Again,
yes.
The central bank has not published its accounts. Okay, so I cannot authoritatively tell you, sitting down here, that this is the amount, because that is what
the president said it in the budget speech.
That is what the president said. I've taken that with a pinch of salt. Okay, you have 22 trillion worth of ways and means financing, there must be an interest rate
And they said
to
the
that.
interest is 1.8
So that's
trillion
fine.
yearly.
So that's money that's been owed to the central bank. Publish your accounts. When you publish your accounts, we can see it there and we can understand the dynamics of what this is. Not that you give me one piece of information. So if you're going to, you are having challenges financing your deficit. So you want to borrow more money to finance this deficit. The revenue on this budget is what? Maybe 9 trillion? And
Projected revenue.
Projected revenue.
Projected,
10
not
10
revenue.
trillion.
Projected.
So, and then the deficit that they want to finance is another one. So you want to borrow more money on top of what you have. And then by the time you look at it, you're saying that 85% of your revenues are going towards debt service. So what money are you going to use for recurrent? How are you going to pay salaries? So you're going to borrow money to pay salaries again.
Yes.
So we're in a debt trap already. And what it is now is the fact that we need serious amendments of our laws to regularize a lot of all these things, because it's not only insolvency, but it's total mismanagement of our debt profile.
And they said they are not we're not rearranging or restructuring our debt. We will have to do that at some point, because the way it's looking now, with all of this coming up and the headwinds of 2023, at some point we'll have to do that.
Well, you have to take a look at the international dimensions. Last year, the Minister of Finance made a statement about debt restructuring, which spooked the market. Right away, all the credit rating agencies downgraded Nigeria's debt. So Nigeria's international debt right now is in junk bond status. LIBOR interest rate is 5%. Nigeria is borrowing between 10 and 12%. So the cost of our borrowing abroad is twice what the normal rate would be. So a lot of problems are, and not only have they downgraded Nigeria, so our Euro bonds are now junk bond status. Also, they decided to downgrade our bank. So there's an effect of that. So it was that statement that caused us. So that the minister is now trying to retract that statement to be able to regain confidence in the international markets. But for me, like I've said, first of all, we need to come out clean as to the total amount of debt that is on the books. The ones that are hidden in the central bank balance sheet and all the other things they have done. When we know the total amount, then we as financial experts can come together and put a structure in place for you. But that law, that financing needs to be backed by legal and regulatory framework.
Just before we go, you talked about CBN accounts.
Yes.
Is this something that the CBN can publish when it chooses to, or there is a deadline that has not been met?
Well, the CBN normally is supposed to publish its accounts, and the convention was that it was made public. But right now, they claim they publish it and they only send it to the president and maybe the Senate. They don't make it public.
So you, the experts, you have no information?
Well, I don't have any information. So until I'm able to see the central bank accounts, then we'll be able to understand the true position of our debts.
Well, thank you very much, Tilewa Adebajo, our CEO, CFG Advisory, for joining us on The Morning Show. Thank you very much indeed.